Welcome to the talk show Promising Bangladesh, sponsored by Crown Cement. Today our guests are, on my right, Professor Dr. Mahbubur Rahman. He is a political scientist and now he is teaching at the North-South University. And he is also known as a vocal political scientist in the arena of political science. On my left is Mr. Bobby Hajjaj. He is now the chairman of Nationalist Democratic Party, and almost everybody knows it very well that he is a rising political figure in the field of politics in Bangladesh. Well, today we'll discuss so many things, including regional, national, and international politics and arenas. Well, Mr. Mahbubur Rahman, how are you?
Fine, thank you, Mr. Sinha.
You are a political scientist, and everybody knows then whenever you speaks, you speak very academically and pragmatically, and that is a pleasure for us. What is your understanding about the visa policy for Bangladesh, which has at the same time restricted the moods of the opposition political parties in Bangladesh? How do you analyze this?
Well, thanks, Dr. Sinha, and my dear co-discussant, Mr. Bobby Hajjaj, and the audience of SATV. Greetings to you all. It's my pleasure to address this issue, even though it's a bit contentious issue. But I would like to go back to the basics, the premise from where it has come. I look at this in a, I would say in an unusual way. Usually people think that United States has come into this game, but I would say we have prepared the ground. If we could have managed our own affairs the way it should have been done, I don't think any superpower or an external power would have come to single out Bangladesh and declare this kind of quote unquote visa policy, especially for Bangladesh, what will disqualify some of the politicians or the stakeholders who won't be playing the positive role towards a free, fair election. So now the problem lies with us. And the question is why we cannot actually reach a consensus. We do not have a kind of working environment. In many democratic countries, this is not the contentious issue. It is settled matter. Every time the election is held, it is not something they debate, it is not something they fight with, rather they fight, or if you say they compete with their agenda, what electoral manifesto they have, what policies they have, how their policy differs with their opponent ones, and how they would figure out the future of their country, solve the problems of their own people. But our issues are not actually on the issues of how to change this country for the betterment. Rather, we are kind of placed at a quagmire that we don't go to the right or left, nor can we move to the front. We are at a place from where politicians, unfortunately, are at war of words. They throw at each other's a kind of bombshell-like words. And this is not actually a healthy situation. And that's why I would suggest that it won't be unlikely that if we can figure out how we would go for this election in a consensus manner in terms of the strategy, how it would be held, and then let's move forward with our own issues. But here some people are suggesting, and they have the right reason to suggest so, that after declaring this quote unquote visa policy, it seemed that the political parties are behaving a little different way. Some suggest that the opposition, party in position, has become more accommodating, and the party in the opposition has got new momentum, and they are coming forward and demonstrating even on the streets, which they were unable to do in that manner or fashion in the previous time. Well, I would rather suggest this external pressure cannot bring anything positive, concrete result until our own players play within the rules of the game which they agree on. And that is why I would suggest, if it helps and it pushes us to the extent that the political parties feel a pressure or impetus to sit together, to have their own dialogue, and can present this scenario to the rest of the world, that they are able to work on their own differences, and they can actually have a kind of positive, peaceful environment. Of course, politics is sometimes volatile, competition is there, contentious issues are there, but still there is a rule of the game, and if civility is maintained, if politics is for the people, then I would say our political leaders would show their wisdom, that they would come out with a kind of formula they can agree on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bobby Hajjaj, you heard what Mr. Mahbubur Rahman says, and as a political scientist, he spoke from his own standpoint. But you are a politician, and the difference you know very well. What is your explanation about the whole thing?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Dr. Sinha, for inviting me on this forum, on this podium. And it's a pleasure to be on the same table with Dr. Mahbub, who's also my colleague, a very respected colleague, and obviously a specialist in political science. And through you, I want to convey my regards to all of the audience who's watching SATV today and this show. So first and foremost, we were talking about the new policy that the US government has enacted here, and this has been going on for some time. I mean, so the way the US government's been doing it, they've been putting sanctions on us. When I say us, they're not really putting sanctions on Bangladesh, they're putting sanctions on specific individuals. They've done this last year to 6 very specific individuals, which created a stir within the Awami League ranks and in government. And also, this time around, this 2023 May, it was clarified by Secretary of State Blinken through some tweets that if we don't have free and fair elections in Bangladesh in 2023, 2024, whenever we're meant to have the elections, then many more sanctions will follow. And based on these ideas of sanctions, I think visa restrictions have already gone into effect, and we are hearing many things, and it's scaring the people in government. So first and foremost, let's talk about the sanctions first, then let's come down to our government. So the US has a policy of, so the US government has a policy of empowering the president, the White House, in creating foreign policy. And in creating foreign policy, the White House has more or less a free hand. And this free hand, not just to states, but individuals in states as well, which, the most recent act, I think, was the Magnitsky Act, but there are many previous acts before this. So basic laws that give the White House permission, the ability to sanction other countries, people in other countries, organizations in other countries. And since last year this has started, but since this May, the White House has made it a point to make it an important part of their foreign policy when it comes to Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh has had contentious elections, as Mahbub also pointed out. Bangladesh has had contentious elections in the last, over the last 10 years. 2013-14 elections was very contentious. I don't consider it an election, but at least I can agree and say that it was contentious. 2018 election was also contentious. And during those elections as well, the West, especially the US, through its embassy here, through Foreign Office, raised concerns and had discussions and so on and so forth. No sanctions were pulled. Nobody was sanctioned. Nothing else happened. There were just discussions. Why is this happening now? This is an important question, This is from the US side. Why is this happening now? Part of the problem, the US has just won sort of gas fields, contracts to gas fields in Bangladesh, so they should be happy. And at least, if you read the newspapers, that's the government's line. They should be happy. According to newspapers, again, I'm not talking to the government. Newspapers are saying the government believes this. So if the gas fields are meant to make them happy and they're not happy, sanctions are coming, then what's happening? So how does this government make them happy? I don't think there is a way that this government can make them happy and pull back on the sanctions. And I do agree with Mahbubur when he says that this is really related to us, that we haven't been able to arrange our own affairs. You see, the US is not giving us sanctions because we can't manage our own affairs. We haven't been able to manage our own affairs for quite some time. There hasn't been accountable democracy in this country for over a decade now. The US has other intentions. They have other problems, and their policy is more related to China, South Asia, the South China Sea, Bay of Bengal. These things are more important to them. But the scare of sanctions works in Bangladesh because over the last 15 years, people in the Awami League government have been involved in corruption at a scale that is so unbelievable. And they've moved so much money overseas that, and all of this money, overseas money, travels in dollars. It's dollar denominated. That's how overseas trade happens. If the US says they're going to put sanctions on these people, then all of the ill-gotten gains they have earned over the last 15 years goes to waste. So these people are now scared. The average Bangladeshi citizen is not scared. The average Bangladeshi businessman is not scared. The average Bangladeshi worker is not scared. It is these people who made huge ill-gotten gains. These are the people who are scared. And that's why the government is scared. And if the government is scared, Mahbubur said about, sort of politicians throwing war of words, and Mahbubur might say, Bobby Hajjaj is starting another war of words. But really, these are just facts. These are facts on the table. From multiple big corporations whose loans and what they've done in the finance industry and whatnot is out. I'm not going to name them on this particular show, but these names are not secrets. You open any newspaper, even today's newspaper, you'll see them. This has happened through the government machinery. And the government machinery, that is the political side of the government machinery. So the Awami League government has enabled these people to move these sorts of funds. And this has weakened our economy. Our reserve is about 23 billion now, which is, just 2 years ago, the Awami League government was bragging the first time in our history our reserve has gone up to 50 billion. Fantastic. Where is the rest 27 billion right now? So we are facing harsh economic conditions at a time when we also don't have accountable government. Now, US sanctions is coming for different reasons, but the timing is good for accountable democracy in Bangladesh. Because right now, we don't have accountable democracy. And while the US sanctions is creating some level of accommodation, as in, just 2-3 weeks ago, because we are all in a one-point movement, engaged in a one-point movement on the streets of Bangladesh. And, sort of BNP and all other parties, NDM, my party, many parties, we are in the one-point movement. And this one-point movement, we had, a few weeks ago, we were supposed to have a big street rally, and the government wouldn't allow us. And then the European Union came up and threatened the government with sanctions if opposition voices are not heard, are not allowed on the streets. And so it was through the threat of the European Union that the government backtracked, and we could go and do our peaceful rallies, because it is a democratic right. So there is no agreed rules of the game, because whatever rules of the game there were, this Awami League government transmogrified to a level where it doesn't make any sense anymore. It's their own kingdom. So we need to get back to accountable democracy, and I think at this point, these sanctions are helping make the government accountable, which might take us to a fair election, or at least a reasonable fair election, as much as we can have in Bangladesh, from which we can hopefully, fingers crossed, get to an accountable democracy.
And thank you very much. We'll go for a short break. Viewers, we are going for a short break, and please keep watching. Viewers, we are back again and we are having talks with Mr. Mahbubur Rahman and Mr. Bobby Hajjaj, and they were having talks on national issues, especially on the visa issues. Well, Mr. Mahbubur Rahman, Mr. Bobby Hajjaj explained what he understands about the visa policy. Now the question is, you raise the question of dialogue between the political parties. Do you find any germ of realities of negotiation between Awami League and BNP, whereas especially the American congressman who visited Bangladesh a few days ago, they raised the question of dialogue between Awami League and BNP, and the foreign minister himself, he replied in a negative mood and mode, says, how can we sit with them because they don't believe in our existence? What is your analysis?
Well, this is the basic problem of Bangladesh politics that we have been facing over the years. That is called zero-sum game, or the politics means my existence means your elimination, and your existence means my elimination. I don't understand from where this kind of perception is coming and why our politicians would hold this notion and approach. The problem lies there. Why I'm saying this? Because actually sometimes it may be a little harsh if I say so, that there is a variation between what our politicians say and what they do. For example, they say that we are for the people. Whatever we are doing is for the interest of the people. But a political scientist, his name is Harold D. Laswell, he said beautifully, and in a, I would say, 180-degree opposite way. He said, politics is who gets what, when, and how. Actually, this is the title of his book. So we have to now figure out where lies the truth. Our politicians have to prove that what they say, they live on that. And for the betterment of the people, for their interest, they have to feel a compulsion to sit together. Why? Because if we have political uncertainty, then our investment will be hampered. And this is an interdependent world. And we shouldn't forget that, fortunately, we are placed at a juncture. We call it that we are holding another neighbor like India and even China, that is Bay of Bengal. Now, we need to take all the benefits, we need to utilize it. And of course, the international game or theater is being staged here, but we need to cater out how we can maximize our interest. And in order to do that, we have to figure out which way we will move. Actually, I would suggest that the political leaders would debate on that issue more than these old issues.
Whether you find any silver lining which compels them to sit together.
Okay, good. I think both domestic and international. Domestic pressure, I would say, to me it looks like that the intelligentsia, well, it may be divided, civil society, it may be divided, but silent majority, the people, are watching. And if they get fed up, and already there is a sign, we call it electoral apathy, and that's not a good sign. In order to engage people, political parties have to engage themselves, and this is one compulsion. That external compulsion is, it looks like we are at a place where two regional powers and one superpower, they all have their interest. And yes, some people say that so far, Chinese position is very clear. Chinese position, because China itself is a kind of totalitarian state. So they don't believe in liberal democracy. As Mr. Bobby Hajjaj was telling, that electoral and accountable democracy, but China does not have that kind of perception in them. But it matters with United States. It matters with India as well. And Indian position is little delicate. Historically, India's partnership, well, even though they say it's not with any political party, it's with the country, it is the testing time for them to demonstrate that indeed what they're going to prefer. I would say Bangladesh has to move this way. Bangladesh needs to figure out how we can deal with United States, we can deal with India, we can deal with China.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bobby Hajjaj, our political scientist, Professor Mahbubur Rahman, asserted categorically what the politician says, hardly they live on it. Do you agree?
That's a difficult question to answer, because the arena of politics is a complicated one with a lot of variables changing at all times. So it is only a fool who sees changing circumstances, changing facts, and doesn't change his mind. So in the field of politics, it is quite common to understand changing circumstances, changing realities, changing facts, and for one to change their mind with their principles intact. That's the sort of changing mind I'm talking about. So that can happen. You were talking about dialogue, and our foreign minister, Mr. Momen, basically told the visiting congressmen and their families that the opposition parties don't want our government in power for an election. We don't have space in the constitution for any other sort of election, so there is no room for dialogue. First and foremost, I'll tell you categorically that that's a lie. Our constitution has more than enough room for an election without this cabinet or this prime minister or this in power. So that's misinformation. Dialogues are important because right now the Awami League wants to have an election where they control everything. That is not the sort of an election any other party, including us, will go into. But having said that, dialogue is important because even if you dethrone the Awami League to come back to election, you need an Awami League in election. I don't want to get into an election where my party is going, BNP is going, some other party, Jatiyo Party or some other party is going, but Awami League is not going. Because Awami League is still a major party in this country. They have kicked democracy from behind. They have been running an authoritarian government for for more than 10 years. Having said those things, they still are a big party with following. And if you want to have a free and fair election, and an election where everybody gets, people can get to show their choices, Awami League also has to be part of that election. And you can't make Awami League a part of the election without some sort of consensus and some sort of dialogue with the Awami League. Awami League cannot have a fair election that the US or anybody else will accept without dialogue with the rest of us. So we all need to sit. It has been made a zero-sum game. It has been made a zero-sum game for a very long time ago. I mean, even since 1981, the discussions have consistently been who's responsible for whose murder. And we have a checkered history. Our country was born through bloodshed in 1971. It was born through bloodshed. And because of our economic condition at that time and the blood that was shed in 1971 and a lot of other things put together, the first few years of our country were pure havoc. And I'm not saying anybody was to blame. It was just pure havoc. I mean, it was an unmanageable country. And the first government, the first Awami League government, Awami League was the first government, so the first government had huge responsibilities over their shoulders. And they couldn't meet those responsibilities. Fair enough. But a lot of things happened, a lot of tragedies transpired. The point now is to go beyond those tragedies. Because we haven't been able to. We have had attacks on the lives of prominent political leaders. I'm not even going to go into who perpetrated these attacks. The current chairman of BNP, Begum Khaleda Zia, she was attacked, her cavalcade attacked, shot, so on and so forth. The current Prime Minister, Begum Sheikh Hasina, her whole party at a big rally, 21st August, was attacked. So there have been attempts on people's lives and people have died. So we haven't been able to get past our checkered history, which brings us to what Dr. Mahbub was saying, the zero-sum game. Once you go into war, see, you go back hundreds of years, you go back thousands of years, you go back to the time of Chanakya. And Chanakya's Arthashastra also clarifies that you don't go to kill the king. If you go to kill the king, this is war. There is no turning back. You can have skirmishes, you can have battles, but if you're trying to kill the king, that's war. There is no coming back from there. You make it a zero-sum game. And a zero-sum game is where I win, you lose, you win, I lose. There is no in-between. There is no consensus. There is no dialogue. And it is these sort of attempts at each other's lives, no matter who perpetrated it. Doesn't matter. That's unimportant at this point. Made it a zero-sum game. We have to bring it back from a zero-sum game. Zero-sum games are for warfare, not politics. And even in warfare, you have discussions. Even in warfare, there is sort of freezing of fighting and then you have discussions. Even Russia, Ukraine, they're talking at a minimal level, but they are. Politics is not warfare. It's fighting for the love of the people. Who gets more votes?
Well, we are coming to again after a short break.
Okay. Thank you.
Viewers, we are going for a short break and come to you very soon. Please keep watching. We are back again to the talk show Promise Bangladesh, sponsored by Crown Cement. And we are having talks with Mr. Bobby Hajjaj. Mr. Bobby Hajjaj, you are talking about latest approach which you have landed on dialogue between the political parties.
So basically what I was saying is we have turned this into a zero-sum game in agreement with Dr. Mahbub, and we have got to sort of step back from that. We need to initiate dialogue, and the dialogue has to be initiated by everybody. So from NDM, my party, I would initiate dialogue, and yes, I would certainly talk to the BNP as well, because we are in the one-point movement together. So I would talk to the BNP as well for dialogue, but also the government has to, as in the government party, the Awami League has to come forward for dialogue. And once we meet at a dialogue, once we sit together for a dialogue, we have to come to it with clear intentions, clearly defined goals that we all want to give the people an election. If that happens, a dialogue can happen.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Mahbubur Rahman, Mr. Bobby Hajjaj elaborated the whole thing in a very lucid and attention-grabbing approach. And as a political scientist, you understand that politics in Bangladesh is a confrontational politics. How can it be asserted that Awami League and BNP should sit together and find what are the basic bottlenecks at this very moment? Do you think so? They are in a position, or they need the help of America at this very moment? Who is the congressman indicated?
Thank you. Where Mr. Bobby Hajjaj ended, I would like to start from there. He rightfully said that the politics has come to a stage where indeed it has become zero-sum game, and politics should not be. It's the war where you can have zero-sum approach. Here, I would say our political parties should have win-win approach. Say if they come to a consensus and there is an election, either one can win or lose. Now, it's not end of the story. If the car continues to run and there are different stations, and there will be opportunities. Today, one party will win, the next time another party can win. If they agree on that we are ready to sit as an opposition, I think in that way, the main burden is of course on the government. Government can actually initiate this dialogue.
Who are the actually in a position to handle the matter, settle the matter as a negotiator? Do you find any responsible persons, not persons in Bangladesh, who are considered to be very much important at this moment among the distrust, mistrust and confrontations between among the parties?
Well,
Is it a myth or reality?
now, I won't say it's a myth. It has not been tried, I would say. Okay? And crisis situation actually compels people that someone will come or some people will come to fill in the vacuum. And if any individual or the group of people can play this historic role, this can save this nation. Otherwise, I'm afraid I can see this nation may show its prosperity, promising, as you say, promising Bangladesh. Promising, no doubt, but we have certain elements. I'm sorry to say this. Rwanda, the two ethnic groups, they fought among themselves, they killed among themselves. They had one of the worst genocide in their own country. Not external powers came and killed them. They themselves killed themselves. So are we ready to be ruined this way? If not, some sorts of efforts should be there, initiatives should be there.
Well, we'll come to again. Mr. Bobby Hajjaj, you are the spokesman of the young generation, and as a young leader, do you find any space for the do you find any melting point of passing generations and the coming generations? I use the term passing generation, not the old generation. Passing generations and the coming generations. Do you find any melting point?
Well,
point of understanding, realization?
I do understand what you're trying to ask, Dr. Sinha. And when you say passing generation, I'm guessing you're referring to the people who are running the bigger parties and the people who were actually effectively involved in the liberation movement of the country, because all of our senior leaders from Army League and BNP, they were. So their politics emanates or starts, and so the basis of their politics is in the late 60s. And so their frame of mind probably has been molded by their experiences in the late 60s in the freedom movement and post, as I said, the checkered history of our country. The new generation, and again, our country is now 52 years old. So there have been consecutive new generations. As university teachers, my respected colleague Dr. Mahbub and I, we see people in their early 20s all the time. That generation, people like us who are 50, that generation, people in between who are in their mid-30s and whatnot, that generation. So there are many different generations, and all of them think differently. And none of them, especially the newer ones, the young, the children, the young adults in their early 20s and whatnot, do not have a very clear understanding of how this country was born. And the leaders who are running the country today, the septuagenarians, the octogenarians, who were leaders in the late 60s, the way their mind works. So there is a clear disconnect between the two. And as leadership positions are handed over from that generation to the next generation, there are going to be not incremental, but dramatic changes, I believe. So that is going to happen. And maybe, hopefully, we can cross our fingers that when that happens, we can move into more space for consensus. Unfortunately, what has happened is over the last decade or so, we have created more divisiveness. We've created more divisions. I mean, Rwanda, as my respected colleague pointed out, Dr. Mahbub pointed out, there's ethnic violence. Go to, the former Yugoslavia, ethnic violence. We are all the same ethnicity. We're more or less, we're all the same nation. But we have created divisions amongst ourselves. So you are either for Noka, for boat, or you are against boat. If you're against boat, then you're against liberation. I'm a Bangladeshi. How can I be against my own identity? A Bangladeshi cannot be against Bangladesh. I mean, there are spies and whatnot. But I mean, in general, your political belief cannot be against the birth of Bangladesh. You are a Bangladeshi. So saying that has created a divide within the younger generation. And I don't know how deep that divide goes. So if the older generation, the passing leaders, if you will, as you termed them, if they can't find space for consensus, then it might be very difficult for the new generation coming in to find space for consensus. And it might be the other way around as well. But consensus is the need of the day. I mean, we absolutely need it. And we do need, I mean, you know, the point you brought up with Dr. Mahbub, a mediator. We do need a mediator because there was dialogue between all of us, the parties in opposition, and the Awami League back in 2018. And we all had come to some understanding. But that trust was broken. So whatever understanding we'd all come to, that didn't transpire. So now we're in a position of no trust. Nobody outside of the Awami League trusts the Awami League. Now, if you and I are to have a contract and I can't trust you, there has to be an external body that can create that trust. Like, you know, if we do business, there is the law enforcement and the court and whatnot, the whole institutional bodies that will ensure that if we have a contract, you have to go by that contract, I have to go by that contract. So I don't have to have trust in you to trust the contract. Problem here is there are no institutions that can do this. And an important question you asked, Dr. Mahbub, there is nobody in the country right now. There isn't. We can think about it, we can talk about it. There isn't one person in the country right now who has the sort of leverage that can bring both parties together, have a discussion, and even if all of the opposition parties we agree, the government party will go by their word now. So at this point, and we don't want to kowtow to any foreign powers, so we would rather the UN, a body that was created after the Second World War so that these sorts of things don't happen. The UN, we would argue the UN could be a good body to play the mediator role.
Actually, UN cannot play any role unless asked by the government
No,
or
again,
the state.
that is why the first thing I told you is the government has to take the first initiative. They have all the power.
But one point is very important from your side. You say there is not a single person in the country at this very moment who can negotiate, who can find some ways for the warring parties.
There's nobody who can mediate.
Nobody mediate.
Who can mediate. There are negotiators, but not mediator.
Not mediate, yeah. That is the main question. Well, Mr. Bobby Hajjaj, thank you very much for your candid explanation. Well, Mr. Mahbubur Rahman, what is your message to the viewers? Oh, you have got only for the 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha. Well, as Mr. Bobby had just said, I agree with him. There is no internal mediator acceptable to both the parties or all the parties at this time. That necessitates external, the body would come in. And it is also true the UN actually can't come just automatically. They have to be invited. And before that, actually, I hope the political parties themselves can agree on this issue, that let us have, in the past we had actually back in 1995 and then even in 2013, but even though none of this worked, so we should get lesson from the past and let's bring back hope to the nation by working in a constructive manner, reaching a consensus among ourselves, and save this nation.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Bobby Hajjaj, only 30 seconds for you. As a voice of the coming generation, what is your message to the viewers?
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Sinha, again, for giving me this platform. My message to everybody who is watching your show today, in Bangladesh, outside of Bangladesh, people who love this country, people who care about this country, and for this country to prevail and be successful, we all need to make our voices heard. Everybody. It doesn't matter if you're on social media. It doesn't matter if you're, sort of one of our remittance heroes sending money back home. It doesn't matter if you're a college student or a business owner. You have to make your voice heard. And the only way to make your voice heard is to shout it out loud. Not everybody has to go on the streets for rallies, but you have to shout it out loud. Every student starts going to social media, even just social media, and telling everyone that they want a fair election. Within these students are daughters and nephews and nieces and sons of our Army League leaders as well. They will get the point. So everybody, please make your voices heard. We need a fair election so that this country can move forward and we can have a government of consensus.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mahbubur Rahman and Mr. Bobby Hajjaj, for your open discussions here. And viewers, we are about to end this program. And before that, let me summarize the whole thing, because we talked to Mr. Mahbubur Rahman and Mr. Bobby Hajjaj. Both of them are very high of the politics of Bangladesh. At the same time, we are apprehended about the ongoing trends and streams of Bangladesh politics. At the same time, they also believe time has a right. We should think about ourselves without depending on the foreign powers. And what is the reality? Let us see. And it will prove very soon, because dialogue should be there. They both of them believe dialogue should be there. How can it be initiated? That is the question of the time. Because Mr. Mahbubur Rahman believes there is not such a personality here in Bangladesh. At the same time, Mr. Bobby Hajjaj categorically assertively says there is not a single person in Bangladesh at this moment who can mediate the matter. So the only option is foreign power, that is America. And thank you very much. We'll meet you again in the next talk show.